In the early 1900s, there were railroad logging camps that did not appear on tourist maps. No courthouse nearby, no telegraph line unless the company approved it, no sheriff within a day's ride, just timber, steam, and a single rail line connecting the camp to the outside world. If you controlled the tracks, you controlled everything. And in some of these camps, silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. One of the companies operating these moving rail camps was the powerful Booth-Kelly Lumber Company, a dominant force in Lane County's timber industry. Railroad logging camps were not towns. They were mobile industrial outposts built deep in forest, following timber stands, then dismantled and moved when the trees ran out. The only reliable way in or out was the company's train. That meant the company transported the workers, the company delivered the food, the company carried the mail, the company decided when someone left. On paper, county law still applied. In practice, authority stopped where the rail spur ended. Inside the Booth-Kelly Railroad logging camp, power was vertical. At the top, company management. Below, foremen and camp bosses. Below them, hundreds of seasonal laborers, loggers, engineers, brakemen, cooks. Housing belonged to the company. Wages came from the company. Transportation depended on the company. Even the general store was the company's. In the Booth-Kelly camp, pay was issued in scrip, usable only inside that controlled ecosystem. The environment wasn't just remote, it was self-contained. And self-contained systems don't tolerate disruption. Logging operations depended on speed. Railroad logging was capital-intensive and expensive. Steam locomotives, temporary trestles, portable rail lines, steam donkeys, and yarders, massive payroll costs. Any disruption meant financial loss. Complaints about rotten bunkhouses, unsafe rail trestles, spoiled food, wage disputes, excessive hours, all of it threatened production. In the Booth-Kelly Railroad logging camp at the end of a private spur, complaints stopped at the tree line, unless someone carried them out. And carrying them out wasn't so simple, because these camps were geographically insulated. That insulation became leverage. If grievances stayed inside the forest, investors never heard about them. If accidents were described as unavoidable, regulators rarely investigated. If workers talked among themselves but nowhere else, nothing changed. So silence became policy. In an urban setting, news spreads through newspapers, public meetings, word of mouth in crowded streets. In Booth-Kelly's logging camp, located 30 miles into the Cascade foothills, their information moved only when the train moved. Outgoing mail passed through camp systems. Visitors were screened. Organizers attempting to enter were often stopped at rail junctions, and workers who caused trouble could be dismissed and removed. before their complaints reached town. That removal didn't require violence. It required logistics. If a worker was told, "You're done here," he might be put on the next outbound train, or he might be told to walk. And trying to walk 30 miles through a dense forest back in an age where there were no cell phones, no GPS systems, no topographical maps, could be fatal. Either way, the message was clear: speak carefully. There were no printed posters reading, "Remain silent." Instead, enforcement was cultural. A worker who raised safety concerns at Booth Kelly might find fewer shifts, undesirable assignments, isolation from others, a bunk reassigned away from friends. Foreman controlled crew placement. Crew placement controlled social survival. And in an all-male, high-risk environment, social isolation could be as powerful as formal punishment. Men learned quickly: don't be the one who causes delay. Don't be the one who questions orders. Don't be the one who talks to outsiders, because the rail line that brought you in can take you out. Railroad logging was dangerous by design. Temporary tracks were laid quickly, sometimes across unstable ground. Trestles were erected with speed, not permanence, in mind. Steam locomotives hauled enormous loads down grades slick with rain. Boilers operated under constant strain. Brake systems failed. Workers were crushed, scalded, or struck by rolling logs. When accidents happened, they could be explained as the cost of the job, and often they were. But repeated accidents in the same location? Unsafe speed expectations? Neglected maintenance? Those are patterns. Patterns require documentation. Documentation requires witnesses willing to speak. Silence protects patterns. Geography did most of the enforcement work. The Booth Kelly Railroad logging camp's forests were dense and unforgiving. If someone left camp on foot, they faced miles of uneven terrain, limited food, river crossings, wildlife, weather shifts. There were no marked highways, no gas stations, no guaranteed shelter. The forest discouraged mobility. The railroad enabled it, but only on company terms. That imbalance shaped behavior. If you angered management, you risked losing shelter, food access, transportation, income, community. Silence was not about loyalty. It was about survival. Logging camps communicated with each other. Superintendents shared names. A worker labeled agitator might struggle to find employment elsewhere. Blacklists didn't need to be official documents. They could be letters or phone calls once telephones reached main offices, or simple word-of-mouth warnings between managers. Keep an eye on this one. When employment options shrink, speech shrinks with them. Silence becomes portable. Labor organizers and reform advocates did attempt to reach railroad logging camps like Booth Kelly in the early 1900s. Some succeeded in speaking to workers. Others were turned away at rail depots. Companies justified exclusion as protection of private property. From a legal standpoint, camps were not public squares. They were corporate land, so the company could determine who boarded trains, who stepped off, who addressed the bunkhouse after dinner. Control the rail, control the conversation. It's important to understand enforcing silence at the Booth Kelly Railroad logging camp did not require constant violence. It required predictability. If one worker was publicly dismissed after raising concerns, that might be enough. If a foreman quietly reassigned someone to the harshest, most dangerous section of track work, that might be enough. If a complaint resulted in lost wages rather than reform, that might be enough. The goal wasn't chaos, it was deterrence. A calm, controlled environment where everyone understood the boundaries. And those boundaries extended exactly as far as the rails did. Legally, Booth Kelly camps fell under Lane County jurisdiction. County law technically applied, but enforcement depended on access, complaints, evidence, and witnesses. Accidents were common in railroad logging. Trestles collapsed, brakes failed, steam equipment ruptured. When incidents occurred inside Booth Kelly's isolated timberlands, gathering testimony required cooperation, and cooperation required courage. Imagine reporting unsafe rail practices to authorities while still living in company housing. Imagine accusing management at the same time dependent on their train to reach town. Even if a sheriff investigated, the camp could frame issues as industrial accidents, disgruntled employees, misunderstandings. Without sustained external pressure, cases rarely escalated. The system wasn't lawless in the dramatic sense, it was insulated. And insulation can feel like outlaw autonomy. The railroad wasn't just infrastructure, it was leverage. It transported logs worth thousands of dollars. It transported payroll. It transported injured workers. And it transported information. Shutting down the line meant shutting down revenue. So the line ran on schedule. Complaints that threatened efficiency were handled internally, quietly, efficiently. If someone threatened to disrupt operations, even verbally, the solution was often logistical, not legal. Remove the disruption, restore production, maintain silence. Silence protected profit margins. Silence protected management authority. Silence protected speed, but it also protected reputations. Investors in distant cities preferred stability. Customers preferred reliable shipments. Local politicians preferred economic growth. Exposing systemic problems inside camps risked public scrutiny. So the Booth Kelly Railroad logging camp learned to solve problems internally, and internal solutions rarely became public record. Eventually, increased labor organizing and public attention began to alter conditions in some regions. Newspapers covered industrial safety more aggressively. Labor movements gained traction. Reforms slowly appeared, but those reforms emerged because silence was eventually broken somewhere. Before that shift, however, many railroad logging camps functioned as semi-autonomous industrial islands, not because they declared independence, but because geography, economics, and private ownership combined to create a zone where oversight was minimal.